of, while they really don't have it together, they're not, um, uh, somebody is not providing for them.
Yeah, so I would think too that just what she's saying is, say somebody is in a facility or they stay by themselves, or maybe they live with a relative, and you're witnessing that they have the same clothes on for several days, or that they're not getting their meds on time, or they're not eating. Maybe they have trouble with being able to put the food to their mouth, or they don't have rides to get food, or they don't have elderly meals coming to their house, or somebody interferes and takes the meals, or any of that. I'm thinking there's is that Ami? Go ahead.
Yes, Omi.
Omi.
I a few years ago there's a situation with a friend of my family's who was in a care home where their one of their caretakers had stolen their credit card and was using their money.
Yes, that's a common one, more than what you think. They're actually can use the phone to call them and trick them into sending money or into making money available. In the chat, we have a couple of other financial, physical, emotional, and mental abuse. And then financial might be being the payee for my relative or for my friend, and I'm the one who gets to say if where the money goes, but maybe I don't pay the bills, or maybe I'm an addict and I have things I'm doing with the money where they might. I've met people who didn't even know where their money went. Somebody took their check and they took their checkbook they had, and they didn't know where anything was. Also getting scammed for money and neglect. And then, yep, they can't go to the bathroom by themselves, neglect from assisted living. And then, thank you, that explained much better than, oh, sorry. And then, let's see.
Somebody actually put something in the chat and then took it down, but I thought it was really interesting. And it was like disrespecting and talking back. And I actually just mentioned this to one of my coworkers who's sitting near me. I find that very interesting because in a lot of other cultures, that's not that big of a deal. Often, you don't see it as a particularly large issue, but in native cultures, elders are cherished and held to this higher level. So something that is like that might not be a big deal in other cultures is something that can be quite serious in ours.
Yes, I think it goes against what in our culture is considered normal. So you wouldn't want somebody yelling, swearing, hollering, or disrespecting their elder. Um, and then when you think about all of those forms of abuse we just talked about, what do you think some of the identifiers might be for you in the community? What are some things you might see? Taking advantage of elders. So when you're thinking about maybe somebody's getting sick, or they're not being able to get to the doctor.
Linda, I would say maybe some identifiers could be like what you said, like physical identifiers, losing weight, or like withdrawing, not wanting to do certain things that they usually do, like going out with, other friends and stuff, or showing up at events.
Yep, somebody put bruising, weight loss, isolating them from friends and family. Also, someone who used to be active and talkative is now more withdrawn and quiet. That's really good. Emotional responses, where somebody might not be responding the way they used to, or they might be crying a lot or withdrawn, just what they said, withdrawn. Thank you. What are some possible reasons elders would not report or disclose sexual abuse or other types of abuse? What can you think of off the top of your head? Why would somebody not want to report? Yeah. What if it's their family members? Or what if they're ashamed or they're scared to say something? Or embarrassed, or there's a dependency on that person, that if they say something, somebody might leave, or they might abandon them in the house, and maybe they don't have anybody else to come and stay with them. And some people think that for somebody who's being abused, even bad attention is better than no attention. They might not have the motor skills, communication skills to report. Yeah, I was going to say that some people don't even know that what's happening to them is a crime, but they know that it doesn't feel good, but they don't know that it's criminal and that there is a reason why it feels so bad, especially if it is a family member that is causing harm. Do you have anything to add to that, Stephanie?
I think if we think about like what our elders have gone through with the systems that we were talking about in the last modules, the trust there is like completely broken, and not just that, but they don't want to get their family members in trouble. And so there's this protection there, and they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort a lot, you know, so they don't get their grandchildren or children in trouble.
So when we're engaging with elders around these issues, it might be these core skills of advocacy don't go in exact order. Sometimes they flip or they change depending on what is being presented today, or maybe what I heard about today. It includes the connect and understanding. Sometimes somebody might feel that it's safe to talk to you about everything that has happened. Also reflecting and adapting what we had as a plan for next steps, which might be now that I know, because sometimes injuries aren't visible. And somebody might tell you in the beginning that, you know, no, I'm fine, or I feel okay. But then later, as they build the trust, start talking about, you know, I wanted to say this, but I got kicked in the back and my back is really sore. Then we change how we're thinking and we adapt our plan or our advocacy work into making sure that the medical piece is addressed. And then, of course, always assuring safety, and hopefully, you know, that have some options, and what'll be as continued care or support for the elder. I mean, they've had a lot of life experiences and probably a lot of things that they've watched, and really we're foolish to think that they don't know different things, even if they might say they do, because or they don't, because they've had a lot of time to know human behavior. But I think that no matter where we're at in life, that things can happen and people step into our life on our journey that maybe we thought in the beginning it was a good fit and a good relationship, but then things start happening that change, and maybe somebody isn't safe around this person anymore. But as there's more trust, or maybe there's intervention, some communities have a community health representative that goes right into the home and can visit with them, or they have home health nursing that goes into the home. They're probably going to be the ones that see it first before the police are notified, or before your office might get a call, or if it's somebody in your family, you know, you might hear about it in a phone call. I just had somebody call me about children and about the safety, and it was somebody in their family. So I'm really surprised that, you know, people don't know that they can take initiative and call and let somebody know, you know, I'm really concerned about this person's safety. So we strategize. Of course, we don't make plans without them being a part of the plans. It's not about us without us. So we want to make sure that they know what's safest for them, but they might need all the choices or the options laid out, and you to help them connect with people who might help to create a safe environment for them and to get the needs met. If it's not you driving them to the clinic, are you helping to fill out maybe a restraining order, you know, or getting them to safety if they need to be in shelter? If, you know, if you have a safe place or a hotel room until we can make sure locks are changed or whatever we have to do in community. Steph, is Deb in here? Do you guys have anything to add to this?
Yeah, Deb isn't here. I would just like to point out the arrows on this diagram because like you can go back and forth with that, and if you feel I guess maybe for lack of a better word stuck or whatever, it's not working, like reevaluating or re-understanding or you know re-strategizing and giving, just like with any other survivor. I think our role as an advocate is just providing that clear understanding of what the you know what's going to happen, or you know and then you know giving them and honoring their choices. It's still the same with an elder. Staying present with them, slowing down, just trying to communicate and understand them. I think maybe getting to know them is huge with elders, like building that trust, and slowing down everything and making it very clear.
Yeah, and sometimes people, because of you know, I guess mobility and the ability, we had a call come in about some teenagers that broke in to a house, and it was in senior housing, and they had went in through a window and assaulted both the man and the woman. And so we went as the victim service program, and then we went with the officers, and they needed support in being able to write out the statement of what happened. Not that they didn't know how to write, but they had mobility and arthritis, and the other person was really, really upset. So talking, they experienced trauma just like all of us, and it is really scary when you're attacked in your own home. So we had to support and then talk about options for safety and getting work with housing to get the window fixed as soon as possible. There's some different things that can come up in being an advocate that, you know, gee, I never thought I'd be doing this, but here you're, you know, you're calling and you're making the connections, just like what she said. And it might not be, you know, as you're analyzing and saying, gosh, that window got broken in the process of that. Now I understand why there's a safety issue. I'm going to connect with tribal housing and adapt our plan for safety and still work on the paperwork and the charges, and we're doing it together. So the officer, myself, and the couple sat and did all of this together. And then our numbers were exchanged, and, you know, a periodic check-in. That's what I was told about our office, was it wasn't just a one and done. I had made and developed relationships with people that have lasted 20 plus years in advocacy. And it's not just about all the things that have happened that are wrong. People want to share the good things that have happened too in their life. They want to have a relationship with you that is, you know, sharing not just bad things, but good things too. Do you have anything to add to that?
I don't. I think you did that. You covered it well.
Okay, the 6 core skills of advocacy, we did talk about those. Hold on just a second. I've got somebody standing at me. That was really important questions. Okay, so when we talked about those 6 core skills, you remember connecting is building relationships with and among survivors, connecting them to other appropriate networks for support and to strengthen our community. With understand, we want to recognize and know the nature of violence a victim has experienced and how it appears in her or his life and the needs or the problems that it's created. Also analyzing, developing a course of action with the victim that alleviates the problems and genuinely meets their needs. Strategize, we want to work out the details of the determined course of action and prepare for each action that will be taken. And then with implement, we're going to consciously do the advocacy work and carry out the specific steps involved in the courses of action that have been discussed and planned. I just want you to know that people can and do change their mind all the time. And as advocates, we support the changes as new information for them becomes available. I've had somebody call the police because their son assaulted them. And then we did all of the intake work and got everything done, and the police came. And then it was an elderly man, and then he changed his mind because he didn't want his son to go to jail. So he called and he said, I'm not, and they're not being cooperative with the police. He didn't want to talk to them anymore. And we as advocates would honor and uphold his wishes, even though we might be concerned. And then law enforcement may or may not follow that. But as advocates, we want to support the person who we're working with, and we are biased. So we're not law enforcement, we're not social services, we're biased in what the survivor wants. I'm sorry, I'm missing stuff in the chat, I'm pretty sure. Okay, reflect and adapt. Continuously question, review, and revise the course of action. Analyze the success and failure of strategies that have been used. Also consider intended and unintended consequences of the actions that are being taken. So think about this, that when we're talking to anybody, including children, elders, and anybody in our peer group, that we want to acknowledge that they are a whole person with emotions, a body, a mind, and a spirit. So when we think about that and our work with another person, then we are encompassing the whole person. That it's not just the person crying, that, there's reasons why and things, and maybe sometimes, the spiritual part being addressed is extremely helpful for people. And whether they're Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant, Mormon, or if they're Native American church, or they're sun dancers or sweat lodge people, or maybe they're agnostic, that sometimes whatever brings them comfort is what's important. Do you have anything to add to that, Steph?
No.
So advocacy for sexually abused elders, we want to acknowledge the cultural norms. So just like what Steph said is perfect, to sit quietly and be calm. I had an advocate that once a certain type of abuse was acknowledged in her presence, that she did this. And I said, you can have your feelings and your emotions about that, but as advocates, we're not gonna, fall apart in front of somebody. We're going to be the support for the person. So just what it's saying, to sit quietly and calmly. We don't want to rush things Like if I have to go pick up my kids at 3:30 and I'm talking to them from say now until it's getting close to 3:20, that I want to quietly excuse myself and try to make arrangements to get my children picked up in a way that is not disruptive to the trust and the relationship that we are building. But maybe if I took the call and there was another person in our office that could have took it that doesn't have that type of a time constraint, because interrupting those interactions and that building of trust and getting information can be a disruption for the person who's sharing that. Somebody who's sitting there looking at their phone the whole time, or they pick it up or they're checking, and those things can be a distraction. So we want to visit with no agenda. We don't have a list of stuff. Sometimes at the hospital, I just barely got a name and I didn't get my whole intake filled out. But as you go along, what your programs are requiring you to have in order to create a space and a file, that you can do that sometimes with a sticky note, that you're getting the necessary information, because just to be present is the focus, and it's where I want to be. I just want to be present with you right now. Also addressing any communication or language barriers. Sometimes they can't hear, but it's embarrassing to tell you, I can't hear. So some people sit and nod, and just to make sure that I'm slowing down and I'm looking at the person and saying, is this what you wanted me to say? And sometimes you'll see they're looking at what you're saying, and then ask. And sometimes I hear better from this side, or I hear better from this side. You'll want to ask them, do you have a preference, or is there a way that I should sit that would be best for you? And you might be surprised. Also, honoring family bonds. Family bonds amongst our people are deeply valued, and we want to honor the loyalty that exists, even if we can see that this person is been a part of hurting them. Not talking about sexual or criminal, but even in raising their voice. And connect with supportive relatives and friends that do care. So just honoring that person. Is there anything to add, Steph?
No, I don't think so.
So we want to make sure we're explaining thoroughly, asking if they understand, provide medical and legal advocacy on some options that we might want to. For sexual violence, I've had to have an ambulance come, or I helped to transport the person if the ambulance wasn't the best option. I have transported people to the hospital, or I have driven my car behind them or met them at the hospital. So providing the medical and the legal advocacy, also helping. Sometimes I carried blank copies of court requests. We had online, you can pull the forms off and then print them or fill them out online. Also informing them of their rights. But I'm telling you, a lot of our people don't even know they have rights. I actually printed it on the back of my business card. And my business card did not have just my name. It had the prosecutor's office, and it had the police departments and necessary numbers. And then it had the victim's rights on the back, which I think is empowering to know I have rights. And this is why I feel bad, is because something happened to me. Also ensuring their rights are protected. Get permission from them whenever it's possible. Providing support, particularly during the forensic exam, if the victim chooses to have one. The transportation I talked about, accompanying the victim when necessary and if requested, and share possible options and outcomes, and honor their choices, but most of all, stay present. So some of the implications for change is there can be sometimes the lack of tribal codes that address elder abuse issues. Also, there can be a lack of policies and procedures for tribal agencies or programs that are handling elder abuse and neglect issues. And for social change, we want to raise the awareness about elder abuse and neglect. And we want to raise it with other programs and agencies and for victim advocates. And of course, we want to always be trying to restore cultural identities, customs, and values. And that's the best way that we could do that. That was a short module.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think it's one of our shortest ones.
Huh, okay. So what do we want to do, Stephanie? Should we power through another one? The next,
Well, is Naida jumping on with you? She's not in yet. That's the only thing.
that's okay because she wrote me a big message and she's in the middle of working on the stuff for the conference. She brings, she was hesitant to commit, but she was written in, and so I explained that to her. I don't know if she's available, but I can write and ask her, okay?
Well, I think you're only about 10 minutes early. It's this
Okay.
yeah, so maybe take a break. But first, I don't know if anybody has anything to add. I just wanted to say Tyrell's chat in here. In some cases, an elder can be removed from a home from their safety, for their safety, but that can also so traumatic from them based on their history of people's being torn from their tribes and communities. I'm so sorry, I did not read that very clearly, but and I wanted to bring up that as like a fear of for my family anyway, my grandma, when she got to a point where we had to put her into a nursing home. Um that what we did was try to educate some of the nurses, and we she had a really hard time adjusting into a like a off reservation, a white nursing home. And a lot of that stuff came back like from when she was in boarding school. And um I remember she would hide her stuff from them. She would think that they were stealing from her, and all of that. And so the nursing home didn't realize like that there's so much trauma there that they had no idea about. And so we as a family would talk to them and explain some of the stuff. And so I just wanted to put that out there because that was on my heart. And then now my dad has dementia, and he's gotten to the point where we had to put him in to a nursing home too. And so I just feel like these are our knowledge keepers, and that's why we hold them so high. And they've been through so much. And so looking through that lens of what they've been through, some of that trauma that experienced, because my dad was also, in boarding school too. And so I don't know, I just wanted to highlight that a little bit, um, because there are some needs there, that the systems might not understand. Um, Becky said effing boarding school, the nightmare and the gift that keeps on giving. So sorry she went through that. I know, and she just, it was very confusing time for her. But yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any like tips or had worked with people in your elders in your community, or has any questions or feedback on that. If not, Linda, I think we could give them a 15-minute break at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. See you in 15 minutes. We'll take a quick break, and then we will come back and talk about our next module, which is sexual assault by self-proclaimed spiritual practitioners. So what is that like? 152, 153. Hi, Dialina. Yeah, we are just ending our module 1, and so we're going to take a 15-minute break. So if everybody would come back at 1:52. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I remembered to record. I am going to do another poll here. So we're just trying to get an idea of everybody's kind of who we have in here, beliefs, and practice. So my spiritual practices are, we have Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, folk. I literally just put like the 5 top according to Google, and then our spiritual beliefs, practices. So we'll keep the poll open for a little bit. All right, I'm going to end here in a little bit. I still see people choosing, so I hate closing them.
So it's about 62% participated. That's pretty good. 51 out of 82 people.
Yep. All right, I will hand it over to you, Linda.
Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoyed your little break there. Take really good care of yourself. So sexual abuse by self-proclaimed traditional healers and spiritual practitioners or clergy. So it is a misuse of power, and this is just so you have the information that was created for advocates to know. The goal is to provide basic information about sexual abuse by traditional healers, spiritual practitioners, advisors, or clergy. So the objectives is to realize that sexual abuse by self-proclaimed traditional healers and or clergy church is a reality in Indian country. We want you to be able to identify why the problem exists, also to identify red flags or warning signs, and to identify the role of advocacy and programs in our communities. Sexual abuse by self-proclaimed traditional healers, spiritual advisors, or clergy. It is a misuse of power. It is against the law for a member of the clergy and for a traditional healer to engage in sexual activities with people who are seeking spiritual guidance. And when we think about that, a lot of our communities and a part of rape culture is to shift and blame the survivor for everything that happened. And a lot of the people who are leading ceremony or who are leading churches, they have a lot of support. So when somebody steps forward, we have to realize that there is a power dynamic that's taking place, that this person is coming in for support, help, maybe, it's an illness or they're something to do with their kids or their relationship, or maybe they got fired, or maybe something happened that put them at a place where they feel like they might need to go to ceremony or seek support from somebody who's been identified as a healer, or maybe they go to the church and they talk to the priest or the pastor about everything that's happened. There's a dynamic that I need something, so I'm going to this person to talk to them. And that can happen, and it does happen to almost all of us, where we're in a position where we feel like we need support. It's a very basic human need, as I need to be supported and I need help. Well, hold on a second. Let's see what's in the chat.
I think it was just for our poll.
Oh, okay, that's for the
Yep.
polls. Got that. Okay, so spiritual practitioners have many names. Some people call them medicine man, medicine woman, a spiritual leader or advisor. Some are known as a traditional healer, a doctor, a lodge keeper, a drum chief. I've heard him called a roadman. Also commonly understood is that people with a gift to heal through ceremony, ritual, plant medicine, dream interpretation, and other practices serve only as a human conduit to the healing work of the spirits. Some people call it spirits, some people call it angels, some people call it sacred energy. These gifts are often not chosen by the individual. A lot of times they're passed down through generations, or they're given in dreams, are earned through fasting, are difficult internal spiritual work, and dedicated mentorship with a knowledge keeper. So the challenge is vulnerability for those who are seeking help. Remember, I said that when I went to get help, I was sick or my family member was sick. And like many of us, people can have previous sexual abuse in their history or in their lifetime or along their journey. Maybe I have had a drug or alcohol addiction in my past, or maybe I'm currently using. Also, somebody who doesn't know much, maybe they were adopted out of their family, didn't know much about their culture or identity. So that might have been kept, that wasn't in their teachings growing up. And it was deliberate and intentional. And I think of the person who messaged the boarding school, that was the intention, is to make us forget or make us never know who we are. And so when somebody has a drum or a rattle or a shaker or tools, eagle fans, or something, or they're lighting medicine, there is really an interest in that, and there is almost an trust that many people have. And when we're struggling with places in our life and on the journey that we're a little bit more vulnerable, we might not be able to balance things out, or maybe we don't know what to expect when we go to seek help or ask for support or healing. We also can be struggling with grief or loss, even in the loss of an personal, intimate relationship, there's a grief that comes, even in a crappy relationship, there can be a grief that comes. I liken it to, it was a part of my life and now it's not here. So there puts a vulnerability in there sometimes for people. Also, we can be influenced by deeply held religious or spiritual beliefs, and some of that is fear. There's fear-based belief systems. There can be overall a denial and a disbelief. There was a time in my life I wouldn't have believed that, that people that held a pipe or that stood in front of me at a church when I was a young woman, I wouldn't have believed that they were doing harm to people. I know much different now, and any human has the ability to harm other humans. So we know that no matter what title somebody might walk around with, or what robe they're wearing, or what, you know, skirt they have on, or what, whatever they're doing, they, as humans, have the power and choices that could lead to abuse of another person. So the denial and the disbelief can come from those seeking help, can come from a family and community, and denial by the offender, the person standing animate that they did not do anything wrong. Also, the ultimate trust. It can be broken when it's somebody that might be telling me 90% truth and 10% is made up stuff that put them in a position of having power and dominance over another. So the big problem in our communities is it is a really well-kept secret. We're starting to be a little more free with information and with sharing, and with the use of social media and you know reporting that people have had the ability to share what happened in a larger audience, not just in my little community or in my big community. But also patriarchy influenced the dominant culture's ideology, meaning that it reinforced that women are subservient and men are in charge, or men are the bosses, or whatever. That's the idea, the thought that goes out in dominant culture. Also pervasive happening, it's happening in a lot of tribal communities. Somebody comes to the community and they hold a couple of, say, darkroom ceremonies or weepies, or they tend to get in positions where they have access to younger people. And so whenever somebody comes into our communities, there's people that are a little bit leery about why are they here, because most people practice in their own home communities that are doing work. They don't travel around a lot of the time, but some do. Anyway, perpetrators are not being held accountable legally or within the community. They can target victims of all ages and all genders and all different vulnerabilities. And this is where I get upset really about all of it, but mostly, there's others that turn around and blame the person that something happened to, or they might not believe that the perpetrator did this stuff. And colonization and forced assimilation resulted in near loss of our tribal customs, ceremonies, and languages. As we work to recover the sacred pieces of who we are and our identity and our faith, perpetrators can easily exploit spiritual needs and seem like they have the answers, or they know, whatever they're proclaiming to know.
Linda, I know that there was a spiritual leader that was using ceremonies, teaching young people how to use ceremonies, and he was saying that this sexual stuff he was doing was part of the ceremony. And the sad thing is, some people, a lot of people don't know what the ceremonies are unless you were raised like that. So he was like sexually assaulting lots of young girls, saying it was part of the ceremonies.
I have seen things happen and there's been children born out of something that was told was sacred. And while a child's life is sacred, the manner in which that was, what all happened was based on lies and manipulation. And when we think of somebody who is a predator, remember, think about people who trained to hunt, like either deer, buffalo, elk, even trained to fish. You know, there's people that know how to do this, and there's people that know how to do things very well. A predator knows how to do things very well, and they are in essence hunting, and they're looking for people and vulnerabilities and spiritual, uh, you know, they're using spiritual practices or what they're calling spiritual practices, and they might have some of it right. They might be the best singer, a real good looking person, and has that charisma to stand up and gets attention from people. Um, and they speak the language of love, but the stuff they're doing is not acts of love. It's acts of violence, and it's done in a real manipulative manner. So,
Yeah.
um,
I have something to say. This whole topic, I think we could talk like a lot on it. I think it really hits hard because for me, spiritual abuse is, I mean, really like it's just like my own abuse cycles in my family. You can just trace it all back to boarding schools and the church. And just like those churches, and this is why I am I'm completely convinced of this is a colonized, assimilated way of thinking and living, is because the church itself right there, and they still are protecting those priests and the nuns that were perpetrating and that were doing all of this into like the elders that we were talking about, right? And so for me personally, my family, I was able to have a lot of healing in finding like where this started in my family, was with, like with my grandpa who was, sexually abused by the priests there, and it was all documented. It was all, and there was no justice there. The churches pushed it on the rug, and it was hidden. And so because right there, I just think about that, and I think about how that moment or that time, how that justice was never served, that healing was never carried out, and it continued on in my family. And so when you think about that, like these churches sticking up for the clergy, now we have our community members doing the same things, sticking up for these spiritual self-proclaimed spiritual advisors, and that power there that you're talking about, Linda, that they have, that support that they have from all of this, all these people. We need to like switch that and start supporting the survivors and our people and being good relatives and shifting that power dynamic, right? To support the people that are actually coming out and saying things, and calling people out, the people that are not doing anything about it, our tribal leadership. I don't know, I just like I've got goosebumps because like this topic is something that we're seeing on the news, that we're seeing in our communities, that but I see very little done about it. And I don't know if that's through our codes or through there's things that we can be doing, and I think it's really calling that out and talking about it, having these like sharing these spaces right here. And because I know I'm almost positive, almost 100% of us in here have either heard about it or experienced it.
And Steph, to go off what you were saying, I agree, because in Canada, they just did this big restitution settlement, right, for boarding school victims. But one lady stood up and said, "This you gave me this money, but you didn't apologize, and you didn't make who did this to me apologize for what they did. You think that the money will just make it go away." So, when you look at that, they're still protecting, instead of letting people heal from terrible, terrible things that happened to them. I just wanted to read something in the chat. Casey wrote, I just recently helped a lady with DV protection order and criminal complaint. The abuser was using that he was a pipe carrier and spiritual things to get out of the court proceeding.
Did it work?
To be honest, yeah, it kind of did. Not very happy with our judge that we have here, but the civil court hearing, DV protection hearing, did not go well. She basically just said, "You guys are adults, not little kids, so just stay away from each other." So, and then I got talked to after the court hearing.
So what you're identifying as the judge in the court system needs training, because a
Yes.
well-trained judge and clerk and system can really create a safe community with
Yeah.
listening. And I'm sorry that happened. I'm most of all sorry, you know, for the family. That
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah, it wasn't good that day.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's good to
Yeah.
see you too.
You too. Dallas says hi too.
A big hug for me.
Yeah.
Standing Rock. Yay. Okay. Some of the warning signs and the red flag. This is some of the stuff in different circles I've been in and prayer circles I've at this time and age in my life. I've prayed all over the place. But I noticed that I tend to shy away, and we should listen when we start hearing fear and shame used in any way to control people's behavior. um, Putting fear in them and having somebody tell you that they can hear you talking, they can read your thoughts, and they might shame you that you're going against our teachings for saying anything about the actions or the things that you're witnessing or seeing or what you've experienced. um, I had at one time a man tell me in ceremony, he came to me and he said that he had seen my face in the drum. And I was looking at him when he's a singer, and he said, I saw your face in the drum. And then he said, do you know what that means? And I said, no. And then he said, it means that we are supposed to be together. And I said, well, I've been sitting here too, and I think if I was supposed to be with somebody, the creator would have told me that too. But you know, if I was in a more vulnerable place, or if I really thought a lot about that person, I might believe that and take that in. If if I'm right in the right space in my heart and my mind, or I'm vulnerable enough. But I've also heard people say that they were selected to have a child with this person, or they were going to be together in some way. So it's like planting a seed in somebody, and even got the parents to agree to it, for a younger person. This was years later I heard about that, but I think there's no excuse for it. I don't care if it's an older person and a younger person, or if it's whatever the dynamics are. Where there is not clear communication and not a clear you know, yes from somebody, then it's abuse. That's all there is to it. But some of the things we noticed was, and when I met with somebody who was traditional, a lot of times they went in, there was always a third party in there. And when I went to see somebody who's from South Dakota, they have a certain protocol too in their community. And I did not speak to him, I spoke to his wife, and he sat there listening. But I brought the offerings in, and then she said, what do you want? Because we're getting ready to go into UEP. And then I explained to her what was happening, and he never said a word to me. And then I just left and went back out. And in ceremony, then they addressed exactly what I had said, and everything was taken care of in a very good way. So there's people and it's respecting the protocols, but also listening to hear and hear together to say, is this a safe place for me to be? But more important as an advocate, is this a safe place for me to bring somebody? You know, if I'm doing a referral. Yeah, I'd always be scared or a little bit leery, flags going up if somebody insists on meeting with me privately. They insist on meeting with you privately, if they want to see your child privately. Amber? Hey,
Yeah,
Amber.
so hey, how's it going, Linda? You guys are doing a great job. So thank you guys for putting on the training. And I guess like I'm dealing with something similar right now where I'm in a new program that's just starting up, and they're a community center. So in the community, they've been using a sweat that the guy running it is it's even more complicated than he's just an abuser. He's an abuser who literally abused my best friend. So I don't know him from the work. I know him personally. And so then I have a conflict of interest. And although so my boss was like, okay, well, we can use a different sweat. So again, though, I don't want to bring people to a place that isn't safe, but I was told by another elder and a friend that the other place that we chose, that these people are also not very good, that they've done quite a lot of damage in the community. So I feel like it's hard because the people that have the places in the space um, aren't necessarily safe for our victims, because if there's a perpetrator there, I'm wondering, like, at what point do I know if this is a safe place or not? I don't know these people personally. The one guy I do know personally, like I said, and then on the flip side, the other person I don't know, and lesser of two evils, because I don't want to bring victims to either. And then our organization doesn't have a space to have our own sweat and ceremony. So it's just like, what do you do in these situations when you're limited with resources? And how do you explain then to grant funders, I guess, like, hey, we had these sweat places and they're great for community events. If the community wants to go there, that's fine. But as a domestic violence sexual assault provider, we can't just be sending women out to a place where there is a known abuser. Like, he's the only one available, that's fine. But I'm not going to subject women to a place that isn't safe. So that kind of scares me as an advocate. We haven't had the sweat at either place. So, I mean, it's still open to the community, but I feel like then, because I'm working in a community center, I'm not working in an advocacy center, I'm an advocate within a community center, it has its underlying problems.
I
Well,
just wanted to add though, if you have a TSAS grant, you can build your own sweat for that program.
I
I
love
was,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
I would just say I love how Deb does her like random plug for TSAS. I love you, Deb. But yeah, I would say build your own, build and find people that you trust to support it, pray about it, and I think it will come. I see a lot of people doing all women sweats. I see people bringing, I mean, you're going to have to get creative, to work around that. And we talk about this through these modules, is getting creative. That's part of it. Like, advocacy is really finding a way for that. And maybe that is bringing somebody in from another community or tribe to, do, sweats. Or I always tell my kids, because me and my kids, we sweat and go to a ceremony, and I'm like, you guys need to stay together, because like I went into, I was taught Christianity at a very young age. Like, my dad was like Bible, like some of that spiritual abuse that I experienced is from that fear-based religion. Like, you're gonna burn in hell if you don't do this, or if you do this, and so I worked my way as an adult, seeking out our traditional ways. And so I had this very high expectation of what our traditional like ceremonies are going to be. And it was so heartbreaking to see and feel in my heart that there was some stuff going on, right? Or this doesn't feel right. And so I had to work through that and learn that, it's man or woman altogether, it's human, that we need to be careful of, and to protect ourselves, and to teach our children that, and other people to protect themselves, because they walk in, I feel like, in a way of where they're like, oh, this is not here, this is all, this is God, or this is our creator. But if it's led by a human, like we need to always put those safeties up. So getting creative in ways like we support, or my daughters are in the 100 Horse Society, and they're teaching them, it's the Ishnati, a coming of age ceremony, and they're teaching those girls now becoming women how to run sweat, how to do that. So right now, I think there's like this gap of trying to find women to run sweat or bring people in, or any ceremonies, that there's a gap there, like, and I feel like we need to maybe work on that area. You know what I mean? Like get creative, start them on your own, or that, I guess that'd be my advice.
And the other scary thing sometimes is, like I read in the chat, I'm not sure who said it, but when you're not raised with the traditional ceremonies and you just crave that knowledge, sometimes that's where the predators will look, like what Linda said, hunt, because they know you're so hungry for it, and then they take advantage of it. So just be careful of who you trust, and take baby steps. And like I did say, if you have the TSAS grant, you can build your own sweat to run sweats for survivors of sexual assault.
Many of the programs have got people that, I'll just let you know what I've been doing advocacy for a long time, but the people that hang in there and continue to be advocates over a period of years, after a couple years, I have heard it referenced that is it's a gift. The ability to withstand and listen to and provide support for people who are in pain or going through some really hard things. And it's a gift to be able to do that and not have things happen yourself. But many of those people are per people, and they have some kind of solid value system inside of them. And even with a glass of water, or just the thought, or just some words, or just being present with somebody is an act of faith. So you are empowered to be able to light some sage and shift the whole energy when you're with somebody. Also, I've seen people use a fan that was given to them. You have been given cultural tools or things that you can use to provide healing and support. Women and men can be really natural healers, and you're born that way to be able to help people. What we do as advocates is help people. So already in your position, you have the power to support healing. It doesn't take, there's no degrees that people come back with accreditation and written documents. Maybe in the churches there are, but in our, I've never seen anybody be able to be accredited. And I think a lot of you already have that inside of you to be able to provide that structure and that care, like what Deb said. You're probably doing things already. Support groups provide an excellent place to talk about things, and sometimes they don't work in little tiny communities because people gossip, but one-to-one support is something that probably each of you do, probably weekly, maybe daily. And people hear about you. The wind blows the truth all over the place. And if you are a person to be trusted in community, the people are talking about that, and they will send people to you to be supported. Even if you don't fill out a court document, just your listening and your presence is healing for many people. So I hate giving away somebody's power or making them give their power to somebody else, when a lot of it is just free, and it is there isn't a lot of written instructions on caring about and loving people. And that is the essence of all of the background of those teachings, is loving people. So back to the warning signs. You want to see somebody who is, take note if somebody tries to legitimize inappropriate behavior, saying the spirit said, or I seen, or you know, sometimes that's real, but if it includes another person and there's some kind of a gratification for them on that, um, you know, I would be, you know, blowing all the warning signs out, you know, blowing my horn about it and saying it. Also declaring that they're all powerful and they must be obeyed or there's going to be consequences. I've actually heard people say that, demand that somebody get Pendleton blankets when the family could not afford Pendleton blankets. The creator knows our situations and what we can and cannot do. That connection is free and it's ours because we're us. It's free. And it's very basic. It's not big, elaborate things. People who have the gift of language and song, those are things we can attain as we go along in our journey. And it's not a secret, it's sacred. So when we lose that, and okay, declaring that they're powerful, I've heard people threaten people. Also mixing spiritual instruction with the sexual gratifications, like what I said, the dreams say the medicine will only work if you blah, 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 or I need your help, making somebody feel special. When you're sitting in ceremony circle and maybe you've been going for months or even years or maybe 30 days, whatever, and that person who's facilitating that ceremony, the singer, the person who's praying, the one who has the drums and the medicine and pours water, or you know, you've watched them do some things and they select you to come and help them. It is like for some people getting a special calling, like to the creator, like you are being highlighted as special. And for some people that feels like such an honor and such a place that it makes us vulnerable. Also, you want to be careful where somebody's had a history of womanizing or battering women, battering people in the community, bullying people. I've seen both of those circumstances. Also, somebody who makes you feel really special because of your unique help or the things you can do. That can you tell when somebody's hyping you up, you know, or you see them focusing on somebody who's, um, you know, younger, really attractive, or, you know, the different things that somebody might find attractive. When somebody is focusing on somebody for a specific purpose, I would pay attention to that. Do you have anything to add, Steph, Deb, Casey, Amber, anybody?
I do have a question. Hello, everyone. Oh, Amber can go first. I think she might have put her hand up and I couldn't find my raised hand.
Oh, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think I just wanted some advice because I think that this has been, I think just like in circles that I'm involved in, this has become like, and I know that this has been talked about before, but it's been like relevant and pretty consistent over the last just couple of weeks in my life with just discussions with folks and I know that a lot of it is trauma based, but I've been in a lot of situations recently where there have been a lot of like aggressive, like verbally aggressive behavior towards women who were maybe intervening in with a situation, and then men kind of step in and you don't need to listen to this woman, you don't need to do this, like quit being a baby, like all of this kind of stuff. And I feel like a lot, now that I'm talking about this out loud, I feel like I can answer it. But like a lot of people will just back down and say like, well, this is the men's role, this is this, and this is that. And then it's just silence. And then the people that do speak up just get so much backlash and like lose this, I don't want to say credibility, but like, I guess in a sense, lose this credibility of like, that behavior is not okay. It's not traditional, it's not anything, but like I guess just like navigating in community when people are craving the people who are doing this harmful behaviors attention and knowledge and all of these things and the damage that it causes, like how do we go about that? I don't, that was all over, so I'm sorry if it didn't make sense, but I'm just like, it's hard trying to find space in community if people only take the word and I guess like respect the actions of those that are doing harm. both men and women and two-spirited folks and everybody, but that this is okay because of their status.
I think in all communities, there are people that think, feel, witness, and experience exactly what you're talking about. And they create smaller groups, and we're not obligated to be in circle with people we view as abusive or that we think the community is totally aligned with, because there's more people than you think that know what you know and feel how you feel. And all it takes is one or two people. You don't have to stand up and confront or fight. We have to find a place of peace. And sometimes we have to create that place of peace, whether it's in our office, our home, outside, together in the bathroom, wherever it's at. Those are all the places I've prayed with people and supported them where I've been supported. So I think we can be the support, we can create the support, we can find people. And maybe some of you in this circle will, you'll understand that you are to be taking some responsibility for spiritual matters. It's not about fighting people or getting anybody, in trouble or I guess for some, depending on what the harm is they're doing, there could be where they have them removed from community, like what Montana did up there. And they excluded somebody from their community, and they meant it legally, and they went full force and supported their people and made this person leave. So there are ways to exclude people from our community. And, for this type of behavior, historically and culturally, it was our understanding that people who did these types of things were not allowed to continue to do them. There was a justice that came with it, and it was the people. Now, remember, I said people could believe lies. Those are blowing all over, and it sounds we want to be in with the people who are popular and that people are looking at when we go into community, whether it's powwows or gatherings, and but we might not, the people involved might not know or might not accept that this person is hurting people. So I think we have to create the peace every single day, first within ourselves, before we get our shoes on and head out the door to go do our work. We should be at peace with ourselves, and we'll recognize other people seeking peace, or we'll have to work to create it daily in our spaces, even in our cars, wherever we're going, that we seek that for ourselves and for our people, that we want safety, we want peace, we want them to be okay. We don't want any more harm happening, any abuse, even with the mouth, the things people say. I saw this on a poster that it showed somebody yelling, and where people diminish it. And I've heard people say, oh, it's not that bad. Oh my God, she's a troublemaker. Oh my God, she's always lying. And you hear those things, and those should be flags for you that I wonder, if anybody's ever talked to her about what's happened. That the people are saying this, but it can be generated by one or two people who have that louder voice in community. So I think as long as you know your truth and you walk in your truth, that is the best you can do. And it will bring and open the door for other people to be honest and to walk in that space with you and to feel like they're supported. I was shocked when I was thinking things that the creator always put one or two people in my path that recognize the same things I was thinking, almost exactly to the word. This came up, and I was looking at somebody and realized, and that person said that and validated for me. I wasn't crazy. It was what I was seeing. So I thank you for taking a risk and talking to us and opening up that for other people to kind of chew on and think about. Thank you, Alexandra. Amber?
And I just wanted to add to that. It's really important, like what we're doing right now. We're educating on what this is. Sometimes people will defend other people or listen to lies or whatever, because they don't understand what it really is. So with education and outreach and just making your community aware of what's not normal, that is not normal, you know. So that's another way to look at it, you know, to change the norm, because sometimes people think that's normal and it's not. So if we begin to change the norm, then we can change the cycles.
Thank you, Deb. Amber?
Yeah, thank you, ladies. That was awesome. I just wanted to say that I came across something kind of different, and so I just wanted to put it out there because you guys can add it to a PowerPoint later, because this is something I never saw before. But recently, the guy that I was working with here that's like in charge of the cultural activities, and he was trying to um get me to work with this guy at the Sweat. And because it's a small community, I knew the guy at the Sweat, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not working with him. But he showed me that the men have a permission slip to have the spiritual leader sign for them saying that they were really at Sweat to take home to show their wives. And I was just like, why is that needed? And he was like, because a lot of wives don't really believe their husbands, and they're accusing them that they're out just like messing around with other women when they're at Sweat and all this stuff. And I'm like, so it's basically them reversing the role and making it like the women are the ones being the abusers, when I know for a fact that this guy that is leading the Sweat is an abuser. Like, he literally broke my friend's arm, like he put her in the hospital. He's not a good person. So I'm like, it's this is well before I was an advocate, so it's not advocate stuff, this is childhood stuff. And I hope he has worked on himself, and I hope he is in a better place. But her and I are still friends, and I know that's probably not true. So I'm just like, okay, I can't have him leading group. And I just wanted to see if anyone else had seen anything like that before, like these new permission slips these guys are trying to put out there. And then the other thing I just wanted to remind people of is that, I mean, I'm only part Native. I have a lot of other ethnicity to me, and my grandmother was full-blooded Lakota, and my grandmother told me that I am a Native woman because my grandmother is a Native woman, my mother is a Native woman, my great grandmother is a Native woman, my great great grandmother was a Native woman, and that gives me all the power I need to help our people. I have it in me because that's who I am. I don't have to know my language. I don't have to know my songs. I don't have to dance at powwow. I don't have to go to Sweat or ceremony. I don't have to be paid to be a healer. I can pray with people for free. I can smudge with people for free. I can pass on any knowledge I learn for free. And one of the things that I've learned is a lot of times, unfortunately, in the position that all of you guys are in, and I love you and I appreciate all the work you're doing, because it is a lot of times like you're standing alone. And it's creator driven work that we find people, Linda, like yourself, like you said, there's always that one or two people that does believe you, that sees what you're seeing and is there to validate what you're seeing. And that is creator driven work right there in itself, because he's showing us we are not alone. There might be 20 people in this building that believe that that spiritual advisor is the best guy because he's fixed their car, he's picked them up for Sweat, he's gone out of his way, because we know abusers are often their best self in the community. It's at home, in private, and with their children that they're abusive and they're scary. It isn't out in public. And I think that's where it's like a fine line of what we're doing, because the community doesn't see what we're seeing and doesn't have the knowledge that we have. But that's why it's so important that we stay the course and we educate. It's not my knowledge. I didn't come up with this. I'm moving the knowledge forward. And that's how I look at it. It's a gift, and it's my job to move the knowledge forward, to give it to my survivors, to give it to my victims, to give it to my family and friends, and to hopefully make a difference in our communities. So thank you guys. That's all I have.
Thank you. So the giving special status, like we said, scheduling private sessions where somebody should come over here and just stay with me for a while. And, you know, even if it's an hour or two, actual sexual violence doesn't take a long time, in minutes if you're measuring. And there's a lot of things that can happen, almost like a grooming tactic that can happen that can lead up to that. But anybody that's scheduling time alone with somebody, like that, you should pay attention to using the target as a confidant or for personal support. I've heard it termed inner circle, that these people are a part of my inner circle and I want to include you in my inner circle. I was told there was 4 of us that would support this person, but I wasn't in support of that person before I was asked to be of support for that person. So I said, I don't want to be a part of that, so then I was ostracized and targeted for a lot of stuff, that was really not fun to go through. But the community knew. Also asked for help with things unrelated to healing. Like I've had somebody ask me for, can you buy a Carfax for me? I'm trying to buy this car because I don't have a card to do that. Or some people have given everything. We're told, you give as much as you can, give to the best of your ability. How much do you want this healing? And when somebody's talking like that, because I've had somebody help with absolutely not even any tobacco. I just told them on the phone what was happening and what I was scared of. And all of a sudden they said, no, I'll go pray about that right now. And things twisted and turned and it was okay. And they died. And I never got the chance to give them anything. And I felt so bad about that. But later I talked to another healer I do trust, and I said I always felt bad because I didn't make that connection. And then he was looking at me and he started smiling and he said, don't you think he knows how grateful you are? He's on the other side now. And I just sat there and I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of dumb now that I think about it. So, but I think it was the conditioning that I had. So, also giving and accepting the major gifts, like I said, like a car, I need you to give me money, I need to pay my light bill, I got all these expenses, and somebody's asking somebody for big amounts of something, or even little amounts all add up to big. Inviting this person to social engagements in public, that you're with me. Also borrowing money, getting involved in business deals with the person, making secrecy a part of any kind of doctrine or healing relationship should be big flags for us to watch. Using or offering alcohol or drugs during session. And I think the spirit of each person kind of gets a uncomfortable feeling. During my time, I moved back to the city from the res, and I had 2 of the kids from the city that moved down here too, they were building a life down here, and they called me. One about, she said that her friend after ceremony, where the guy was running the ceremony and he had his wife and his kids were running around, he text messaged her friend and asked if she wanted to go to a movie with him, just the 2 of them. And she said, does that seem weird to you? And I said, yeah, it does. I said, did it seem weird to you why you called me? And she said, yeah, that seemed not right to me. And I said, well, because it's not right, because he's here with his wife. He's apparently in a relationship. He sees somebody who's younger that he wants to spend time with. And so he puts it out there, and if she takes it or not. And then I had a guy call me and tell me that he was partying up at somebody's house. They were drinking, but also using. And he said, I woke up and he was hollering at me and telling people to get up, that you need to help me clean this place up. We're having you weepy later. And he said, does that seem like it's right? If, like, I was just drinking with him and we're using, and now people are coming over here to thinking he's the person that's going to heal them. He said, I don't feel right about being here because, and I said, you need to go with your own feeling about that, because both of them knew that something didn't sit right with them, and yet they were questioning their own feelings. So until, people might call you about stuff like that, or say, hey Amber, this is what happened and I don't feel good about it, but I just want to tell you. And then what it is about empowering other people. Not that we're the wise ones with all the answers, but each of us walks with that place of truth and knowledge inside of us. And we need to help people to not just understand and be empowered that they have that, but also to help that part to grow. Okay. So some of the impact on the victim is disbelief, intense feelings of betrayal. They might feel that nothing is real when it comes to spiritual beliefs, that God is not real, that spirits aren't real, that help isn't possible. It takes a big toll on somebody who's been abused by somebody in leadership. Also, the questioning the creator, spiritual ceremonies are now can be uncomfortable, are traumatizing. They might believe that they themselves are partially evil or not worthy of real spiritual help. Also experiencing a wide range of emotions, including fear, shame, humiliation, rage, and they might choose to avoid ceremony and they'll grieve that loss also. Victims all respond differently. There isn't a one and done and a right way to feel after things happen. There's just simply the way the person feels. So countering the denial and disbelief, it's essential to remember that the harm doer does not hurt every single person, just like what I've heard in conversation, that in public and sometimes in ceremony, man, they are the best singers and they got the words right and they got the beautiful fans and the things they do, or they speak, the language of faith very well. So it can be difficult to believe if you have not experienced it yourself. But our job as advocates, as we stand biased, we always believe the person telling us. It's okay for us to feel confused or angry and disbelief. It's okay for them. Also ask around about the person. Listen more than with your ears. Listen with your heart. Also talk to somebody that you trust. And follow gut instincts, empower other people to do that. So what is absolutely true is spirituality resides inside each of us in this circle right now too. We're always in relationship to all of creation. Other humans are not required for this connection. We have that by ourselves. The spirits share freely and are always coming from a love-based place. There's not shame or you're doing it wrong. There's not that stuff when you're in that space and that energy is present. There should be no cost associated with it. We can ask questions. Remember, our ways are sacred, not secret. And a genuine healer will not be afraid. They won't be scared of any questions you have. They'll be very clear about what they're doing and where their gifts come from and what's going to happen in ceremony. And they'll identify who their helpers are. And remember this, you're free to walk away at any time. Something doesn't feel right, you can go. So we have talked a lot about this and I'm running out of time, but the factors that influence a victim's decision to report, I think first understanding that it's illegal for somebody within a place of power and community that has taken responsibility to be accountable with their knowledge and the things they do. They are accountable to all of the people, not just to the person they're sitting with. And they have a sacred trust that has been granted to them. And with people that have that, like doctors and therapists and healers and the people that take extra time to learn things to help the people, they have extra accountability within our communities and within society and with the creator. And they are held accountable just like all of us. So anybody can hurt people regardless of what they're standing with. So for the advocacy role in general, it's our job, of course, is to talk to the victim, determine the wants and the needs, and support their choices. Again, informing them of their rights, the codes, the laws, the jurisdictional issues, addressing safety concerns. Sometimes it can be as much as making a medicine and a protection with them. That is empowering, that I wear a protection for myself daily, that I wear this, just like somebody might wear a crucifix or the rosary, that people can wear protections and they feel, it's a reminder of my faith and my the support that's outside of me. explain all processes and provide support and accompaniment. Also, for the survivor of abuse by a practitioner, is you want to make time for the victim to trust other people, even to start to trust themselves. We want to encourage that earth-based connection, including the connection to the water, the trees, the stones, the dreams. Explaining the criminal justice system response, allow them to make choices, and we want to work to demystify the spirituality. The program responsibilities is provide training and have your program policies on how to respond to those who experience abuse, misuse of power and sexual exploitation, the grooming and the tactics that are used to control people, the impact on the victims, secondary victims, and community, and then responding to the secondary victims, the victim and then their family, their children, their loved ones. You know, they all carry some of that abuse and the grief that can come with it. Also understanding exactly the way Amber explained that in some of the situations, the community dynamics. She did a really good job at breaking that down on how it showed up. Having public awareness and education, observing and access to practices of spiritual practitioners in the community. For system change, we want to develop tribal laws and hold all sex offenders accountable. Remembering also, tribes have the power to exclude people from their nation and from within the boundaries of their homelands. Identifying, developing code of ethics for traditional practitioners and healers, they should have no problem. In fact, you can have them help identify and develop codes of ethics. What do they think that others should be doing and that they're going to hold themselves accountable for? Decolonize our ideas on who can be a healer. I'm telling you, you guys are all healers. You're sitting here, you're committed to working with people who have been hurt in such a horrible way. Social change, we want to create accountability through community, refer to healers that provide transparency about their practices, or you go with them. I never sent somebody somewhere. I went with them if we went anywhere, and we sure smudged off a lot of people in our offices. So I know that we can do that too. You know, with the TSAS grant. No, I'm just kidding. I'm being Deb now for a second. You want to boycott those known to abuse others. You are not obligated to go sit somewhere. People can't force you to do that. And you can step out, you know, and exclude yourself. We want to also kind of shy away from people who don't allow room, who don't allow others in the room or charge money. We don't have to send people or go there. And that is the end. And I'm sorry we went over, but gee, we had a really good discussion there, Stephanie, Deb.
Yes, very good.
And Linda, yes, you can do all that with the TSAS grant.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Linda. Oh my gosh, you guys. And thank you for everybody that poured their heart out and told us your experiences. Yeah, I think we learned a lot. Thank you, Linda, again. And we are going to take another 15-minute break. And we are going to get into our next module, our last module of the day. Thank you.
Good to see you. And thank you for all the work you all do in your community. Thank you for your commitment to the people.
Yes, thank you. Can somebody do for me? Should we do a 10-minute then or 15? Just want to make sure. Because I don't know your module, Ingrid.
Sure. So we are going to be talking about adolescent and child sexual abuse, and it's scheduled for an hour and a half. I think that we can get through it. I think, you know, we've covered a lot of or some of the slides in prior modules.
Okay.
So maybe 10.
Okay. So I'll see you guys back at 2 or 3:04. I'm gonna let the recording continue. And I have to go run and pick up my kids. So you're in good hands with Ingrid and Becky, just in case anybody's trying to message me. So I wanted to put that out there. Thank you. See you in 10.
This is Ingrid. I am on the call, so feel free to drop any questions or comments directly to me until Steph gets back. We'll see you all in a few minutes. Sorry,
Ingrid, did you want me to run the PowerPoint?
that sounds good, Deb.
Okay,
I like when you do it for me.
okay, I can do it for you.
See you guys in a couple minutes. Okay, I show 304. I hope folks are back and ready to rock. Deb, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Did you want to do me to go back so you could do the polls? Or
Sure, I didn't see that there were any, I didn't see a poll on mine,
it's
so
this one? It's just this one.
sure, if folks want to answer this one, go ahead and drop your answer in your chat, what your ideal vacation is. I think that's kind of a good exercise to have in between that last module. And we're about to jump into discussing adolescent and child sexual abuse, which can be another heavy one. So does anybody have any ideas about an ideal vacation you'd like to share? The beach, you bet. That sounds like Debbie's answer too.
It
National
would have been my, anything with water, ocean, river, anything where pool.
Mhm. That sounds great. Anywhere tropical. I feel you, Becky. Okay, so one exercise I just want to talk about before we jump into this material, because we're kind of in a heavy, oh, I love that. Anywhere with your mom, camping, getting remote, for sure. We're kind of at a heavy point in the 40-hour, kind of getting through the heavy stuff. We know the work that we're all doing is heavy in and of itself. And so I just wanted to share with you kind of a vagus nerve stimulation, kind of a brain reset that was taught to me by a child psychiatrist who I work with here in my community. And she asks us when we're feeling activated or when we can start to feel our nervous system getting flooded, just by the nature of the material we're talking about, to cross our hands one over the other and then place them on our chest. And we can flutter them back and forth like a butterfly, just at your own pace. And this will activate the vagus nerve, also because of its bilateral activation of the body, activating both sides of the body with opposite hands. It helps to regulate the nervous system. So please feel free to access that tool if it at all might help you as we go through this. And of course, if anyone needs a break, we trust you to self-regulate. All right, Deb, we can move to the start of the slide. So we're going to be talking about sexual abuse of children. And we're starting from this framework that children are gifts from Creator. They are not objects, 1. And 2, they are not objects to be physically or sexually abused. Next slide, please. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have some basic information that will help you advocate on behalf of children who have been sexually abused. We'll talk about some definitions of terms, legal definitions that you might be hearing. We'll talk about how to identify the needs, so how to understand what you're already observing, learning how to file a report, understanding the overlap and the interworkings of different agencies and systems, and then we'll wrap up by talking about strategies for systems and social change. So to start off with a definition, child sexual abuse looks like a lot of different things, and you will very likely never see the same exact case twice. But first and foremost, we need to understand that it is a crime. It's typically defined as when a perpetrator touches a child's genitals or makes the child touch the perpetrator's genitals, and that would include the groin, inner thigh, buttocks, breast. And that word intrusion seems kind of like a weird word to have to describe sexual abuse. But if we think about just the physiology, like the structure of the human body, there are a lot of ways to intrude, particularly in the genital region. This also includes non-physical contact. So say exposing a child to another person's genitals intentionally for the purpose of sexual gratification, exposing a child to pornography in many different forms, intruding upon them while they undress, like the violation of that privacy, talking in a sexualized manner to children. And of course, we know about the many forms of digital violence, that sexual language, exposure to photos or images, and the innuendo. I think one thing we've become desensitized to as a society is when a child understands or can follow along with an adult conversation. That's not normal. And children, especially when there are sexual innuendo or overtones in a conversation, that is something just to keep an eye on. Next slide, please. So for the state of Minnesota, and I think every state has some stratification of the law as it relates to the sexual abuse of children. First degree is the most serious, and this is usually a felony. In the state of Minnesota, it requires the use of a weapon or that the perpetrator is in a position of authority. There's a contingency about the age differential between a child or the victim and the offender, and usually requires the result of some kind of physical injury to the child. Second degree, typically the same, but penetration is not required. Third degree is a felony. They're looking for penetration or one of several other conditions such as force, an age differential, that kind of thing. Fourth degree, same as third degree, but no penetration. And then fifth degree, the non-sexual contact of intimate parts, or non-consensual sexual contact of intimate parts. So the sexual abuse of children cases are often difficult to prove because the standard, of course, is beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecution typically depends on physical evidence. Like we talked about earlier, juries love physical evidence, right? They want DNA, they want the CSI, and those are that's very difficult to get because a lot of sexual abuse of children cases are non-acute. Sometimes they are, but those are the rare case. And we're also looking for a confession from an offender and or a credible witness. And unfortunately, in our society today, many adults do not view children as naturally credible, naturally believable. I think children are very easily disregarded in our society at large, and particularly within the criminal justice system. I had this really weird experience in December. My family was all together, and one of my aunts was there visiting. She misplaced her keys. And my daughter was the only child there. She's just a baby. And everybody turned and looked at my daughter. I said, there's no way she took these keys. It's just not her. Of course, 2 days later, we found the keys in my aunt's shoe. And she said, oh, I must have forgotten that I put them there. But children are often blamed and rarely believed. We can go to the next slide. So like we talked about, there are many different considerations in cases specifically relating to children. The victim does not have to prove that they resisted or, that they said no or that they physically put up a fight. Although defense attorneys love to ask that question, it's particularly disgusting in cases relating to children. The corroboration of the victim's testimony is not required. Ideally, there would be a forensic interview of a child that can be used for their testimony. The victim's sexual history is not admissible as evidence. These laws are typically referred to as rape shield laws, and I encourage you to get very familiar with them because prosecutors, sometimes attorneys who are working in the courts forget that there is this provision, that there is this protection for victims, and you as an advocate can speak up. Like we talked about in our discussion of the forensic exam, the county where the assault occurred is responsible for payment of that forensic exam. There is no restriction on gender identity in order to be considered a victim or an offender. And it is important to understand the power differential in the relationship between the child and the offender. For example, here in my community a couple years ago, we had a high school girls golf coach who had been perpetrating sexual violence against girls in his program for decades. And one of the really powerful points we were able to discuss in that case was that power differential. He's a person in a position of authority. He has control or some sway over their academic career as well as their athletic career. He had good standing in the community, and that helps sometimes to educate a jury or even to help a victim survivor understand how the dynamic came to be. Like, how did the situation end up this way? And of course, the marriage or ongoing voluntary sexual relationship never makes sexual contact permissible. So it is important for advocates, I believe, to understand the age requirements or the differentials that the different laws require. I can never remember what they are because they're so convoluted, but I encourage you all to study them. And of course, when there's a sex offender who maybe has a prior conviction and perhaps is on a registry, it is very hard. It's easier to hold them accountable, but that requires a conviction. And getting to a conviction is very difficult. Our children need immediate attention. They need immediate care, and our families do. And so I just sit in awe and in gratitude to all of you who fill that gap between the prosecution and the point of an assault happening. You fill a very critical role. Next slide, please. So we know that our Native children are abused at much higher rates than non-Native children. Like, this statistic refers to it's higher than every other race except for Pacific Islander children. This statistic is very commonly used. We don't, unfortunately, have very robust data on the sexual abuse of children, but we usually refer to 1 out of every 4 girls and 1 out of every 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18. And it's estimated that in 93% of child sexual abuse cases, the child is familiar with the offender. And that could be a family member, a bus driver, somebody in the community, someone who has established that familiarity with the child. And of course, we know that our Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ children are experiencing this form of violence at even higher rates. Next slide, please. There are studies that have tried to ascertain to what level children lie about sexual abuse. And I always think that this is interesting because I think we as adults would love to believe that children are not telling the truth when they share these horrific experiences, when they make these brave disclosures. Unfortunately, the studies show that it's very uncommon for a child to lie. When I was providing direct services We, law enforcement, all of us referred to the statistic as 2%, between 2 and 6% of children either lie about having been sexually abused or lie about some detail of the abuse. It's very rare that a victim would ever forget the abuse that they survived, and we need to remember that healing can absolutely take place even if there isn't, say, a legal process, if there's not a conviction, if there's not forgiveness, these things that we sometimes like to demand of victims or survivors. And one narrative that we absolutely want to interrupt is that not all perpetrators are victims, and not all victims are destined to become a perpetrator. Especially in the sexual abuse of children, we do often see children who have been sexually abused then becoming perpetrators, sometimes against younger siblings or children within their school or daycare. And that dynamic exists, but it's not destiny. And again, that is where you as the advocate can come into play and offer some support, some education, some advocacy to interrupt that cycle. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about what a perpetrator, I typically refer to them as predators, love to find or often looking for, we're talking about people who are extremely strategic. They're very cunning, they're very intelligent, and they know what they're doing. The sexual abuse of a child does not happen by accident, no matter what an offender might say. So they're going to work or live where children are accessible, where there's very little monitoring or oversight of them, particularly in a position of power. They often target single mothers or single parents with children. And unfortunately, a child who is alone in a home with a single parent is at greater risk yet. They're quick to identify weaknesses. They're quick to get close to the child's parent, to create an intimate relationship where that parent maybe is sharing about their trauma, what they've survived, their fears. Maybe if a parent discloses like, oh, they're so stressed about finances, they don't know how they're going to pay for daycare, this person might say, oh, I am free every afternoon after 1 p.m. I'd love to provide childcare. And they're quick to put themselves in that position of we call it ingratiating themselves to a parent, essentially making the parent feel indebted to them. And they're, of course, also looking for children who are left alone a lot, children who are looking for that adult influence or presence in their life, and would just jump at the opportunity to have an adult interested in them. They're quick to identify what the needs of children are. Of course, I want you to remember that this is not an empath. This is not someone who's just naturally in tune with children. This is a predator who understands the behaviors of their prey. So they're looking for children who are lonely, isolated, lacking that confidence. They're not well connected, maybe socially, to their peers. Maybe children who are already acting out in attention-seeking ways. And they're absolutely looking for children who have been abused before, because that lowers, unfortunately, a child's resistance to what we would call red flag behavior, right? Next slide, please. So these predators are taking these very deliberate steps, convincing the children that they're special, which of course our children are. But can we make sure that our parents, we ourselves, are the ones who are filling up our children, who are tending to our family members so that they're not looking for it in these high risk interactions. They're very good at using secrecy and isolation. Even like Linda was talking about in our discussion of spiritual abuse, looking for those one-on-one interactions. so that it's not scary, right? One-on-one interactions where we're going to get ice cream, one-on-one interactions where tell me about your day, like come to your bedroom and just tell me about your day. Really creating that as a safe feeling space for the child. And all of these things are tests to see how far the child is willing to let them go. A lot of it is desensitization. So predators are trying to break down those natural barriers. I had one of my husband's aunts a couple of weeks ago said, I noticed that your daughter really doesn't like to be touched. And I was like, yes, I've done something right as a parent. But my daughter really bristles at people who, kind of like pat her on the shoulder or, play with her pigtails, that kind of thing. Because I've told her, you never have to be touched if you don't want to be. But that makes me an abnormal parent, I understand. But these things like, oh, if I tickle you today and I tickle you tomorrow, and then the day after that, my hand goes to a new place, are you going to perceive this as just normal tickling and you're not going to resist? You're not going to tell your parent. It is that progression over time. Sometimes, depending on the cognition or like the age of the child, the predator will kind of get ahead of the victim's conscience to say, this is normal, this is healthy, this is because I love you. You're just so special that I can't resist or whatever, so that the child doesn't feel that guilt and that compulsion to tell an adult. Of course, depending on the predator and depending on the dynamic with the child, things could become physically violent, of course, outside of the sexual violence. Those threats to harm, the punishment, which could include physical assault, and all of these things come together to separate the child, to isolate the child from their support system. And one question you might ask yourself if you're not quite sure what you're seeing is this person's behavior helping the child to love their family more and to feel more safe and secure at home? Or is this person's behavior helping the child to love them more than their family of origin, assuming that the family of origin is safe, of course. So I'd encourage you just to think about long-term, what is going to be the outcome of this? And it'll become very apparent. Oh, this behavior is definitely making the child feel like they are number one in this person's life. They always, get the new clothes. They always get the gifts and the other children don't. And I would encourage you just to keep note of that type of thing. Next slide, please, Deb. Oops, looks like we lost our slides momentarily.
My computer jumped or something, so I'm fixing it.
That's okay. We'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions?
I just wanted to bring up too that sometimes you'll see a lot of younger girls, they'll have like new Nike stuff or new cell phone, and then they help recruit new victims because they're like, hey, look what I got. He gave me this. So sometimes they'll use other children or adolescents to help groom them.
Absolutely.
Is this one we're on?
Yep, this is great. And I think that your comment, Deb, segues nicely into this. If we're sometimes talking about like a maybe preteen or early teen girl, that dynamic is pretty common, often happening with folks that maybe they met online, but usually with, of course, those older, typically men who are looking for ways to, again, ingratiate themselves, to create that, eventually, I'll say, you owe me. Well, I bought you all those shoes, or I bought, you and your friends, blah, blah, blah. Now this is what you owe me. The grooming online looks a little bit different, but it's to the same end, right? They're looking for, they're looking to be what the child is looking for. So they're going to ask about the child's age, their interests, their home life, their school, how are they doing in school? What is the family struggling with? Because the predator is looking for ways to kind of become the savior, right? To become something special to the child, to be what they are not getting in their life. Of course, they're going to lie about their age and their physical presentation. They're not going to be anything like what their profile might look like. And typically, if we're looking at maybe slightly older child victims who perhaps are even engaging on dating apps, which is very sad and scary to think about. The offenders are, of course, they know what they're looking for. They know how to spot a child who is lying about their age in order to get access to the apps, because they're also lying about pretty much everything. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to add something, and it's not just apps. So you'll see a lot of this grooming online with Xbox and PlayStation, because all of a sudden they're in chat rooms. And we had a young girl here that was trying to hitchhike to Ohio because there was a guy that was going to save her, and she had met him on one of her gaming devices. So I know that a lot of kids game, and I have gamers here, and I always think, well, they're safe, they're not. And then all of a sudden he started saying, I want to go to the movies with a friend. I'm like, well, where did you meet the friend? He's like, on PlayStation. I'm like, no, because, so you got to be careful of the things that you're letting come into your house too. Like,
Absolutely, Deb. And to your point, as the parent and even as the advocate, it's so important for us to know more than the child, right? To maintain a clear understanding of not only apps, but anything that has device connectivity to the internet, where people can have connection to them. I was just reading yesterday about a child who had a school issued Chromebook, and the school didn't realize that all of the Chromebooks had like unfettered access to YouTube with like no controls on it. And thank goodness one parent noticed, because she was keenly listening to her child, and she realized he should not be able to see these types of things on his school computer. He was very young, like 8 or 9. And so we have to be listening. And if there's something we don't understand, we have to get knowledgeable about it. Yes, even, I don't want to say like dorky things, but even those dorky kind of games like World of Warcraft, all those games, Roblox, Fortnite, everything. These predators are, just assume that they are 10 steps ahead of you. They are in all of those spaces.
and the scary thing is how many parents are working or busy, so they're letting them
Yes.
have. So it's really like checking on the game, putting boundaries on the game, putting locks on the game, really monitoring it. And the other thing is, I have a couple of friends that their daughter just had children, and she won't put any pictures of her baby on any social media, because you don't know where that picture of that baby that you innocently put on your Facebook or Instagram, it could go anywhere, and they could make it into something that's so gross. So, protecting, at first I was like, oh, and then I started realizing that she's just protecting her child. And, like I said, it's real innocent that we put them on there because we want to, show off, but are we setting them up for people to use for other means?
And on that note, I'll just say one of my good friends is a federal prosecutor, and she specializes in the prosecution of child pornography, which we know has other words, but she says, just assume that if you think it's a cute picture of your kid, the pedophile does too. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a naked photo or that kind of photo in order to be enticing to a predator. So some red flags that I'm sure you have all seen, feel free to drop comments or observations in the chat. Sexual behavior or no sexual knowledge that is not age appropriate. A lot of times people will say, I've heard them say, well, of course she's lying. There's no way, there's no way that this happened. And I'll say, well, how does a 6-year-old know how to describe a sex act? You tell me, how is this knowledge age appropriate? I would definitely challenge you to challenge the people who are trying to paint a child as unbelievable or incredible. If a child is exhibiting fear of a certain person in particular, a certain place, a fear of going home, regressive behaviors, so regressing developmentally, a lot of times this looks like wetting the bed, or wetting the bed when a certain person is visiting or after a visit. Changes in sleep patterns, changes in appetite. If a child is acting parentified, like if they've clearly been given responsibility, or if they've been made to feel more adult or more responsibility because of the grooming behavior. Of course, self-harm. Self-harm is a huge red flag that a child has enormous emotions and agony, internal agony that they don't have a way to express. And those physical complaints, chronic UTIs, huge red flag. Of course, bruising, bleeding, STIs, any type of physical trauma, and avoidance of particular situations. If a child is suddenly not wanting to go to a certain extracurricular, or if they're not wanting to go to Sunday dinner, these types of situationally specific avoidances. And then exaggerated responses to everyday situations. So when you're noticing a child who is suddenly dysregulated, when you're thinking, this behavior is coming out of nowhere, or a parent might be coming to you saying, I wonder if my child, has oppositional defiant, or, some other kind of diagnosis, because they're having these exaggerated responses. Just take note of those and look at those in the bigger picture. Deb, did I interrupt you?
No, I think I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say sometimes too with boys, you'll see that they dirty their pants and they'll sit in it because they just don't want anybody come near them. And if they stink and they're dirty, then nobody will come near them. So I've seen boys that were sexually assaulted, and that's like I saw a couple that would do that, and they said it protects them from,
Yep.
The other thing is gaining weight, like being unattractive. They'll might not brush their hair anywhere more, or wear real cute clothes,
All ways to protect themselves. Go ahead. So we talked about some of those short-term impacts, but we're talking about even long-term, that this form of abuse robs a child of their innocence. And we can think about that in a lot of different ways. That might be something for you to think about individually. It, of course, creates a distrusting relationship with their environment. Who can I trust? Where is it safe to be? Am I unworthy? What did I do to make this happen to me? I must be a bad person. There's a lot of children then find it difficulty to establish what we would call baseline or normal interpersonal relationships because of that fear, that kind of chronic anxiety. The development of healthy sexuality is often disrupted, and it can take decades to reclaim that and to figure out what it looks like to have a healthy relationship with one's own sexuality as a survivor. The harm at a spiritual, at a soul, at an essential level within the person can sometimes linger for a lifetime. And these, of course, affect all relationships for the rest of their life. Of course, it's not a death sentence. I want to be certain that as advocates, We're not always painting just such a gloomy picture. I think a lot of resiliency comes from being aware. So if you're helping a family navigate this type of situation, knowledge is key. Helping a parent to understand, okay, this bad thing did happen. Here's what we're looking at. Here's what we can expect. And here are the resources. Can be a navigator to help people move forward through an experience. Go ahead, Debbie. And of course, this is part of our holistic approach to advocacy. We're always thinking about the interplay of the body, mind, spirit, our emotions, and the expression thereof. And how, of course, depending on a number of different factors like the child's age, the type of assault, who the offender is, what the family dynamic is, the support system dynamic. Children require advocacy on many different fronts. It might be with the school, it might be with their spiritual leader, might be for the parents. And so we just want to remind you of these 6 core skills to make sure that we're activating all of those skills as we provide advocacy in this type of situation. We're of course going to bolster that non-offending caregiver as they consider what is best for their child. Like I said at the beginning, there's pretty much never going to be the same exact case of child sexual abuse twice, which means that there needs to be a unique response to every child, to every family we serve. Next slide, please, Deb. So what are some things that we can say? I think our language is really important in these types of cases. I think we always need to start with, I believe you. Children are so scared of not being believed, and they're going to test the adults in their life. They might say something really weird. And if the adult in their life is like, what did you just say? That is so crazy. Don't ever say anything like that ever again. Or if the adult says, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. We're inviting a different response from the child. Are we safe to tell? Are we an adult who is going to hold them in their distress and to work with them to navigate the situation? Or are we going to further isolate the child and make them feel less believable? So I love this. Thank you for telling me. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to help you. So it may not seem important, but social change happens in a lot of different ways, and using this type of language is going to affect change. Unintentionally, a lot of parents, a lot of caregivers use words or language that further harms a survivor of sexual assault or abuse. We can continue to educate, of course, within our organizations and community members about how to employ this language. And the main point of this is that very frequently when disclosures are made, the trusted individual hearing the disclosure will decide what to do with it. They will be a gatekeeper of that information. So they might report, they might not report. They'll tell the child if they're being truthful or if they're not being truthful. And so I want to remind you that it is not your responsibility as the advocate, and it's not the responsibility of the non-offending caregiver to substantiate sexual abuse. That is the responsibility of investigators. And so I want to remind you all that we're part of a team. We're part of a team response to the sexual abuse of children, whether we're just a family member, we're just a member of our community, we're maybe formally part of a multidisciplinary team, maybe we're employed professionally as an advocate. In all of these ways, we are part of the response. Next slide, please, Debbie. So it will be important to remember that as you assist families, much of your responsibility is to observe how different systems do their work, what is important to the different systems, and then to work to identify problems or points of conflict that might arise for the child or youth and their family. So to understand, what is everybody in this room intending to do? What is the role of law enforcement? What is the role of child protection? And then how can I best center the needs of the victim survivor and their family? So while every situation is different, here are a few things that are important for survivors that you as an advocate can assist with. So protection and protective actions. So sometimes this looks like a protection order. Sometimes it looks like putting alarms on doors within a home. Sometimes it looks like taking away electronic devices. All of these things are, of course, to support everyone's safety. Pardon me. And then to provide information so that everybody can make informed decisions. Here's how you advocate with the school if a child needs time off for medical appointments, for counseling. And, here's the role of the Child Advocacy Center. Here's some information on ICWA. And here's kind of the bigger picture. And we want to, of course, restore our children and our youth to that sacred status within our communities. And so we have to keep centering them and their needs as we work through perhaps a case investigation or prosecution. Next slide, please. Pardon me. So when a child is sexually abused, it's natural to want to reach out in any way to help them. And sometimes the compassion we feel to protect a child can kind of shift the focus, off on the perpetrator. And the role of you, for you as the advocate is to constantly keep the criminal behavior of the sex offender and in holding them accountable at the center of the work. So some things that we can remind children and their families of is to confirm that the offender made that choice to harm. So no matter what the child did, said, to whatever level they feel like they participated and are thus complicit in the abuse, it is never, ever, ever the child's fault. We want to, of course, continue to raise awareness within our communities, our systems, to strengthen that connection, to start that healing process for the child within their family unit or their support system. We want to encourage everybody within the family or community unit to engage in healing, whatever that looks like. It doesn't always mean getting into counseling, right? Healing can look like a lot of different things for people. We want to make sure that they have access to those resources, that they know what they are, that finances are not a burden, all that type of thing. And we want to shift away from shame. There's a lot of shame embedded in the colonizer's language and in the ways of the colonizer. And we want to be able to identify it and interrupt that.
And I just wanted to add, like, if you have the TSAS grant, the one thing about TSAS is that they do provide funding for the whole family. It's not just the victim. So you can service the whole family because the whole family is secondary victims. So that's a very important part, that everybody can heal together as a family.
Okay, so some tips to help the non-offending caregiver help their child or the child survivor. To be very clear about what to expect in the process. So your child advocacy center, your prosecutor's office, child protection, they should all have resources that describe their process. And if they don't, I encourage you to advocate for those. I really enjoyed, I had a lot of fun mapping out the criminal justice response to child abuse in kind of a child-friendly way to help kids understand what to expect next and to visually show them that this can go a lot of different ways and none of it is wrong. We're just going to go through it together. Because navigating systems is exhausting when you're trying to help a family stay whole. And of course, just to continue to educate. Go ahead, Debbie. A lot of what we want to talk about is assessing the language that we use to describe either the violence that happened, the perpetrator's behavior, sexuality in general, and make sure that we're not perpetuating shame, that we are exemplifying our traditional values, the values of our home and of our family. And that, of course, hinges on being educated ourselves, educating the families we serve, and not taking a child's anger or behavior personally. So I used to always recommend families complete a parenting class, and not like a parenting class through child protection. It's called Circle of Security. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that, but I recommended it because it helped the parents to understand that they have a role in their child's healing, even though they themselves are a secondary victim, and to be able to process their own emotions while holding space and being regulated enough to support their child's emotions. Because, of course, they're children. They don't have the skills or the development or the resources that we as adults do. And one other thing, I hope you all are considering this in your internal policies and structures in your work, is how are we giving enough time and space to the families that we serve to allow for healing? I advocated for a change in our internal policy that said we had to close out a case if people didn't respond to 2 or 3 phone calls, and instead to give people as much time as they needed. People would take sometimes a year, and they'd call and say, "Hey, is that offer for counseling still open?" Or, "Hey, I know I said I didn't have any questions when you talked to me 6 months ago, but I have a question today." So how are we allowing time to also be part of healing? Next slide, please. All right, this is our little break. I'm going to do a little of this myself. I'm going to drop the name of that parenting class in the chat as requested. Of course, there's some other great insight that has also been dropped in the chat. I encourage you to access that. Does everybody have a drink? Some medicine? Okay. All right, Deb, I'm ready. Okay, so of course, all of this hinges on a report. We're hoping that somebody has made a report, and that's how we have become involved in a case. So we've talked about this previously, but Minnesota law requires that those who work with children to make a report to Child Protective Services if they know or have reason to believe that a child is being neglected or abused, or if a child has been neglected or abused within the preceding 3 years, or if there are indicators of harm to self or others. As always, if there is an immediate concern, we need to just call 911. If a child, say, presents with an acute injury, a verbal report must be made immediately, no longer than 24 hours after learning the information. A written report must be submitted within 72 hours. And of course, jurisdiction matters. So it is considered best practice in our advocacy work to let a survivor or a caregiver know as soon as appropriate that advocates are required by law to report suspected child abuse or neglect. And of course, speaking for the state of Nebraska, it is child abuse for a child to witness or be impacted in any way by domestic violence in the home. Next slide, please. So in Minnesota, you can contact a police department, sheriff, a local child protection or welfare agency in the jurisdiction where the incident occurred. If you're not sure, you can research it here, or I would say call the number you have and ask for help locating the appropriate agency. Michigan has a reporting email. Oklahoma, we have their hotline number there. There's some information for California there. And I think all of your programs should have those resources. And if for some reason you don't, please reach out. We want to make sure that people have the right information there. Next slide, please. So what should you expect when you make a report? The call taker is going to ask for your name, your phone number, or some contact information, and your relationship or connection to the family or child in particular. Essentially, how did you come to know this information? They're going to ask where the child is now, and if you have concerns for their immediate safety. They'll ask for a description of the incident, the injuries, who's in the home, who's a caregiver, perhaps the names of other children, and anything else you might know, any kind of context. Maybe you know that there are 2 other pending investigations against the same perpetrator, or maybe you know that a person in the child's home was recently arrested for drug use. All those types of things are going to go to investigators, and I was taught that you never know what has already been reported. And so don't feel like you have to make the case when you give the report. Just trust that your information is going to be part of a lot of other information that either they already know or they're about to learn. I used to feel like, oh, I don't want to call because this is such a silly thing. Not even sure I know what I saw, or I'm not sure I even understood what the kid said. And more often than not, it was one of the pieces that helped activate a systems response to help get a child to safety. So some states allow anonymous reports, and I think sometimes those are appropriate, and sometimes it is best to give your information so that perhaps an investigator can contact you and either corroborate your report or get further information from you. Next slide, please. So of course, when there is an incident of sexual assault or violence against a child, multiple systems are going to come into play. So like we talked about, it's helpful to know who's doing what. How can we safely say that each of these systems are going to respond in a way that centers the victim? And really this hinges on our advocacy and our influence in these types of situations. So we'll go through some examples of this, just reminding you that you as the advocate can and will help prepare the child and their non-offending caregiver to navigate this process. And long-term, we can influence this process to make it safe and truly serve children at the center. Next slide, please. And one other part of this, of course, is managing expectations. So helping everybody in a situation to know what to expect is going to support a positive outcome. So the intervening systems that will likely be activated at the time of an incident of sexual assault of a child, so of course, law enforcement, might be state, might be tribal, might be BIA, the Child Protective Services Agency, some people call it child welfare, Children and Family Services, whatever that looks like for you. They're going to do that screening that we had talked about previously, that scoring maybe of a family, the safety, risk, and needs of the child, and they'll put together a case plan. Potentially, ICWA could be activated. This is the Indian Child Welfare Act. If the child is in need of removal, they're prioritized. A tribal member or kinship placement is prioritized to keep our tribe intact and to keep our children with us, to keep us within our keep them within our community. And eventually the criminal justice system could become activated. It could be tribal, state. This could go into federal jurisdiction. I had one case out here where an adolescent girl was using Tinder to connect with adult men, and they were coming from Wyoming, South Dakota, Colorado, Utah, to commit sexual violence against her as a child. And so it became a federal case. And that was a very interesting learning experience for me. And child advocacy centers hopefully will become activated as well. Some places have a CAC. Sometimes law enforcement agencies have a forensic interviewer on their own staff. It just depends on how things work in your community. Next slide, please. We always need to consider the many systems that are serving and interacting with our children. It's not just what we just discussed. We're also talking about parenting evaluators who may be activated through child protection. A GAL, or a guardian ad litem, may be assigned through the courts. Schools often provide social workers or counselors who can provide services during the school day or at the daycare setting. And those providers, child psychologists, other mental health professionals. And of course, we need to be thinking about the impact of our larger community on our children. If you are working with any of these types of folks in your advocacy work, I encourage you just to stay in good communication and good relationship with them. I think being in good relationship with other people who are serving our children and families means that we will be able to have influence and help center our children in these investigations and through these processes. Next slide, please. So let's take a pause here. Why do practitioners respond the way they do? I think sometimes we can be very frustrated with the response of other systems-based folks. So let's think of a worker in any of the systems we just talked about that intervenes in the life of a child. So every practitioner has varying degrees of discretion and autonomy, but none of them get to make up their own job. And the institutions that they work in influence, control, organize, and coordinate to do their jobs in certain authorized ways. So everybody is governed by some code of ethics or law that we may or may not understand or agree with. But as advocates, we need to understand their various roles and the part that they will play in an intervention to support the child and family we serve. Next slide, please. So we're talking about kind of the contrast between what an advocate can offer and what a systems response may be. We'll kind of further emphasize a comparison here. For an advocate, we of course are accountable to victims, and we're going to continue to work for change within those systems and the society in general. We're going to work at our core to dismantle the conditions that have allowed this to occur in the first place. And as systems, they're depending on the system, they're accountable to different things. They're accountable to the public safety factor, to the courts, to their constituents who voted them into office. Perhaps they're accountable to the larger concept of justice and accountable to individuals. Next slide, please. Pardon me. So it's fair to say that practitioners in various systems are there to help in the ways that they've been trained to assist victims, but depending on the system, they're going to be accountable to factors outside of the child and their family. As advocates, we rely on confidentiality that is protected in a lot of different laws. We're responsible to our training, and we're grateful for your time here in this 40-hour training. And we're responsible to our program mission and our internal policies that allow us to center women and the survivors of sexual violence. Systems are often responsible to many different factors or considerations that we don't have in our work. HIPAA, structured decision-making tools, boards, when we talked earlier about the ways that child protection workers are going to assess and evaluate and score a family for risk, that is based on what's called a structured decision-making tool. And we're kind of at the mercy of those. And you as an advocate can just continue to speak truth when those tools do not center the child and do not center the survivor. Next slide, please. Okay, so Child Protective Services, their purpose is to protect children. They have a lot of laws that direct their work and do not allow for a lot of discretion in their work and response. They're doing that initial investigation, they're perhaps doing that ongoing case management, and they're linked to law enforcement, to courts, to ICWA, to perhaps contractors who provide like supervision for visits or family support. They have to work with those other agencies. And law enforcement is there to enforce the law and to maintain public safety. Of course, highly regulated, and their role is to investigate. They're working to investigate a case so robustly that it moves on to a successful prosecution. So of course, they're linked to prosecution. They're also connected with probation, perhaps medical facilities. And most probation officers are consider themselves law enforcement officers. Next slide, please. So child advocacy centers can be seen as part of the criminal justice system. Out here during my time at our child advocacy center, we could never accept like a self-referral. We would sometimes have parents come to our front door and ask for their child to be interviewed. And our policy was that we accepted referrals for interviews from the prosecutor's office, from law enforcement directly, or from child protection. And that was the only way someone, a child could be interviewed at our center. So interviews are conducted by trained forensic interviewers. These interviewers are trained to ask non-leading questions and to gather information and evidence in such a robust, clear way that it supports a successful prosecution. And the whole idea behind the Child Advocacy Center movement, and I encourage you all to get familiar with it, is to reduce the number of times that a child has to tell their story. For a child to come into a CAC to be interviewed, it's recorded both video and with sound, so we can get the demeanor, we can get the body language by a trained professional in a trauma-informed manner, that we're not further inflicting harm on the child. So it aids prosecution by reducing the likelihood of a child recanting and reduces the likelihood of a child's story changing. We know that children often will tell certain parts of a story and maybe want to tell more details as they heal. And so child advocacy centers often offer what's called an EFI, an extended forensic interview, where a child can come back and add more detail or expand on certain parts of the abuse that they experienced as they feel prepared to do so. And CACs are, the best practice is that they operate as part of a multidisciplinary team. Unfortunately, they do not exist, are not available in all tribal communities, but most CACs are working to have a mobile interview facility. I served 14 counties as the sole advocate through our only CAC, and we clocked a lot of miles. So people who work in the CAC are going to do their best to reach the children and families who need them most. Next slide, please. So the responsibility of child protection agencies really come down to 4 essential functions: to receive those initial reports of child maltreatment and to screen them out, Again, that's a structured decision-making tool. I could just go bananas when the hotline would not accept a report that I made, like they wouldn't accept it for investigation. And I'd say, oh, it's your structured decision-making tool, isn't it? Like I know what it's going to say, but I have to make the report anyway. They're going to assess and investigate cases of reports that have been accepted for investigation. They're going to provide those services, family support, perhaps financial, medical, all those types of stabilizing supports for families and children. And they are legally required to work with ICWA-specific caseworkers if appropriate. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about ICWA, ICWA was passed in 1978. The primary purpose is to protect our cultural and community integrity from the unnecessary removal of our children by state and federal agencies. So the way that this looks in practice is to actively work to prevent the removal of a child in the first place, of course, unless the child is in danger, to prioritize placing the child with family, kinship, or a tribal community member, and then to actively work for reunification to restore the family unit. We want to strongly encourage you to get very familiar with ICWA. There are a lot of resources out there, and we'd be happy to share those if you feel like you don't have access to them on your own. Next slide, please. Because your advocacy is going to look a little bit different if ICWA is ignored or disregarded in the case that you're serving on. We encourage you to contact an attorney. We're looking specifically for folks who have either Indian law experience or child protection experience. Contact legal services like legal aid and the child's tribe. Tribes often have a lot more legal resources than individuals do, and contacting them will typically activate a pretty strong response. The court might order different services or a different placement if it is determined that ICWA is not being applied correctly. And so again, like we had talked about managing expectations, this is certainly something that we can be helping our clients and the communities we serve to understand. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about multidisciplinary teams, or MDTs. And this is a best practice that is fairly recent. We have been kind of utilizing them in different forms, but this kind of more formalized structure is used in several different ways that you'll see when there's a case of child sexual abuse. So there's, of course, a SART, which, bye, Diane, Becky taught a little bit about earlier this week. The SART might include an advocate, maybe you, law enforcement, lots of other people. There's going to be a child protection MDT. Our MDT out here coordinated with our SANE nurses, our pediatric mental health care providers, schools, law enforcement, of course, child protection, the CAC, prosecutors, and GALs. And also other MDTs can be established or maybe organically developed, just depending on the needs of the community. And so if you feel like maybe the right people aren't in the meetings or an MDT isn't serving your community in the best way, I encourage you to think about what that looks like and how you can advocate for a change there. Of course, your leadership, your presence on those teams is going to have a change. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about implications for systems change, of course, context is everything. There are political and social constructs constructs that support and perpetuate violence against our women and children and sexual violence in general. That systems change. These institutional changes have really strengthened our legal response, have changed federal, state, and tribal law. We've shifted and developed protocol for law enforcement in responding to these cases. For example, law enforcement is now trained to not interview children when there's an allegation of abuse, to immediately activate the team so that a forensic interview can be done. We had the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006. And of course, ICWA. And those are just some examples of institutional changes at the federal level that have worked to protect our children. Next slide, please. So let's talk about ways that we uniquely can help change the way that our communities, our society responds to the sexual abuse of children. Here are some ideas, some ceremonies, some traditions we have to bolster resilience for our children and for our family units, for our community in general. I really appreciated folks sharing about their experience with ceremony during Linda's presentation on spiritual abuse. So of course, we're talking about accessing these ceremonies in a good way and in a safe way. So we have our baths, our sweats, our naming ceremonies, ceremonies that help us center the sacredness of our children, can encourage our families to use cradle boards, our traditional child rearing practices, perhaps even our traditional midwifery, the way that our children even come into the world, our different coming of age ceremonies, and of course, using storytelling to maintain those teachings and to help remind ourselves to teach our children that they are sacred, that they are the most important thing, that we believe them, that we'll do anything to help them and to keep them safe. I don't feel like we can say that enough. And our ceremonies and our traditions help us remember that and help show our children that as well. Next slide, please. Of course, every tribe, every community, we have our own language and our own customs, but these are just, some universal values that we talked about, right? Strengthening that bond between the parents and children and helping parents remember their responsibility and the trust that Creator has to even gift us with our children, to ensure children are not removed. And if there is removal, that it's done in accordance with ICWA or considering kinship, to adopt and to center practices that remind us that our life givers and our children are sacred, like I said, to celebrate and respect those differences so that we're not allowing our children to feel isolated, to feel alone, to feel disconnected just because they might be different or they might have unique challenges, to value our children for what we're supposed to learn from them. There's a lot. And to just center keeping children close and to be mindful of people or practices that want to keep us separate from our children or want us to feel like we have to entrust our children's care to other people. Sometimes circumstances demand it, right? But there is a predatory way that abusers want to keep us from our children. And we want to center and demand practices that require accountability and that allow us to hold harm doers accountable within our community. I loved hearing about the different ways we can hold harm doers accountable in terms of the spiritual abuse that they perpetrate. And certainly in times of the sexual abuse of our children, it's just as important. One more slide, I think, Deb. So to kind of conclude our time here together, let's talk about how we can shift these messages that allow or tolerate or even encourage sexual violence. Like I said, creating those swift and strong responses to harm doers is a great way to show our children that they're valuable and that harm doers will not be tolerated and will not be part of our community. To practice that language so our children always know that they are believed and that they are valuable. To bring our families, our children into community, into strong, healthy community, and to interrupt language like these casual jokes or inappropriate words, or even like the normalization of violent language, so that it's not perpetuated and so that not one more person has to hear that and think that it's normal and that it's acceptable. All of this, of course, is to work to end trafficking. And we believe that a lot of this really hinges on the restoration of our traditional practices. Of course, the practices of justice, but also of healing, of restoration, of community, and always the centering of our most sacred children. I think that's our last slide. Deb, was there any? Okay. So we have a few minutes. I don't want to keep people here just for the sake of keeping you here, but if folks have anything they'd like to revisit or to continue to talk about, I am all ears. I would love to have a conversation here together. Okay, well, I thank you all so much for your time, for your energy, for your care and participation. I know these things are so hard to talk about, so I want to remind you all to access your practices for healing, for restoration, for grounding. And if you ever need support, I know that Steph and Deb are amazing resources. And I hope that you'll take these words not only as things that we need to do for our clients and folks that we serve, but that we're worthy of them too. Like we're worthy of being believed and of being cared for in our own experience as advocates, perhaps as survivors. And you're worthy and you are loved and you are cared for in all of your experiences as a human.
Thank you, Ingrid. And thank you, everybody. As always, we will be staying on for an optional debrief, and we will see everybody on Tuesday, March 5th for prostitution and trafficking, and also advocacy for our LGBTQ2 spirit. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Amber, I don't see anybody on that still needs ASL, do you? Okay. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Amber.
Thank you, you too. I'll see you ladies.
Later.